Hi, David. It's really good to see you. How are you today?
Good morning, Lazarina. I am very well.
It's so great to talk to you after all these years. We've stayed in touch, but 10 years ago, I started filming with you, and you were one of the featured artists in my documentary Life After Babylon. And your poetry inspired me so deeply. And you told me you're a poet too, and I disbelieved you. And a few months later, I started writing and could not stop. So you are very responsible for my poetic life ever since. Thank you for that gift.
Well, you're very welcome.
Yeah. How is poetry flowing for you today? And how do you describe your life poetically today?
Interesting question. How do I describe my life poetically today? Well, I would say that poetry comes from being provoked by the miracle of nature, meaning in all regards, the human nature, nature itself. And when we find something a special, a little tickle from reality that causes us to connect things which might not otherwise be connected and have that insight into a connection we didn't see before, I think is the where poetry springs from. And my previous style, when we first connected about 12 years ago, more or less, is when we started. And I, as you know, would be inspired by things in the moment and then write on small pieces of paper or napkin or whatever happened. That was indicative of my sense of the immediacy of the poetic moment rather than being somebody who plans and constructs my writing or particularly poetry. There are even poets, of course, who do plan and rewrite and work on the structure of things. My particular style and inspiration is that things more or less emerge from the subconscious, fully constructed by some magic process that is just part of my being.
Amazing. I love that you use the word tickle because tickle is such a word of subtlety of perception and full presence. To feel a tickle, one has to be attuned to even perceive it. It's not a punch and it's not a knockout and it's not like the muse striking you in any kind of grand way. So this kind of listening to that whisper is really the inception for me as well for poetry. Hmm.
And that reminds me of a poem that you and that I shared when you were asking about potentially sharing poetry here. And I remembered a poem I wrote about 25 or more years ago in my early 20s or so. And I think it gets to a lot of where that inspiration comes from and what it's like. So I can share that little poem now from so many years ago, if you like. So I want to build something, but nothing seems simple or complex enough to undertake. How to avoid the unwelcome guest, imperfection, and what structure may stand the test of tireless time and not crumble or fall down, torn down, another foolish attempt at integrity in this world which admits of nothing permanent, save continuous, unsparing change. For now, I content myself with this, a passing fancy of a moment shared with you, soon gone by, but everlasting, and as true as you allow. So this is a poem that when I wrote it, I felt very satisfied and it felt so true to me and it still does. And this is what I feel like my life is essentially just this. I'm here to do something. And sometimes it seems like everything is too hard to do. And sometimes it seems like everything is too easy. and sometimes nothing means anything, and then sometimes the smallest thing means everything. And we're right in between that. And that's where poetry comes from, because we are pulled by these tidal forces of life, by, you know, the drama of life and death and love and fear and all of that. And in between, here we are, like that little filament of a light bulb that gets sparked and illuminates. And so we are here to be that, and to hopefully cast some light upon creation for our fellows.
I am so deeply touched. Your poem ended on the word allow. And I was in silence for a few seconds because I was literally allowing to feel the palpitations of my heart. When we're moved, there's sensations that move through us, and the word, the living word, moves through us. And in a way, I feel like when we use conventional language, it's easy to come to a place of deadening, where we use language for the purposes of convenience or consensus to facilitate certain things, and we easily categorize and label. But when we hear poetry, I feel like poetry is literally this act of resurrecting of the word, where it engages the imagination and the embodied listening in a completely different way. So my heart started beating really fast as I was hearing every line you were reciting.
Wonderful. You know, some of the most technical thinkers about life, about logic, about mathematics and language recognize and acknowledge the power of poetry. That poetry, sometimes in a few lines, can express more of meaning than, you know, maybe a whole book or something. And this, like I said, has been acknowledged, as you know. I've written about general semantics, linguistic philosophy, and I wrote a chapter of the book that came out in 2019, the book of radical general semantics. And Alfred Korzybski and Ludwig Wittgenstein are the two people that I was writing about, who are two fundamental philosophers of language and also engineers and very technical thinkers, who both acknowledge that poetry cuts through the limitations of logical expression and is able to communicate more of real meaning in a briefer time. And that is highly empowering to me, to see that the people with the most technical, mathematical minds also see that poetry is of a different character, and that there's a power, kind of, I see it much like the power of atomic energy, that when we go down to the smallest unit and we split that atom, that unbelievable energy is revealed. In the same way, what you were saying is that you said something about how language is freed by poetry, that we are empowered this way because these words that can be deadened, you know, people say love and enlightenment and goddess and all these words all the time, which are powerful words inherently, and then are made to be meaningless by their vapid use and overuse. And in poetry, we can then reclaim the power of those and any word, as our, you know, acronym practice, as we've, you know, done together, and I'll mention a little bit about that, brings us to, is that words can reveal to us unexpected depths of meaning. And the acronym practice allows us to experience some of that easily. When I was about 22 or 3 years old, the first time I made an acronym, it just happened spontaneously. I wrote on a piece of paper the word android with no reason why. And I looked at the word wondering why I wrote it. and then I just made an acronym out of it. I wrote, "Another new dimension revealed our infinite dream." And I wrote it and I said, "Oh, I like that." And then I started to think, I wonder what other words would happen. What would happen if I did this with other words? And then it became a practice for me that's evolved over the years and has shown me an immediate, accessible oracle. So, as you know, oracle like tarot or runes or the I Ching, these are devices for us to be able to connect with that infinite subconscious, infinite unconscious, the collective imagination is available to us that simply. So I take, for example, now my name is David. And the name that would come to me now for David would be designing always virtuous integrity, Dharma.
That is beautiful. So, would you say that acronyms were the onset of you becoming a poet? Were they a tool throughout the years? Were you writing poetry before the acronym games? They're games, but they're actually a profound exercise, as you said. I love the concept of what you said, that they're almost like a divination art because they're codes to perhaps what we're anchoring in that moment, through our body, through our lived experience. And they're also prophetic sometimes, revelation of what we need to pay
Sure.
attention to. Yeah.
The acronym emerged long after I started writing poetry. I had my first major time of poetry was when I was about 14 years old. I became very inspired, and I wrote a lot, and I had little books of poetry where every page had a different poem, and some were happy and some were sad. And actually, I just remembered another one that I like that is from that time, like 14 years old, 15 years old, and it is oppression into freedom, peace into strife, the trigger of a gun, the edge of a knife. Young men become soldiers, kill each other in the night, dying without a thought of what they fight. And then it said, I'm trying to remember this one, and then I said, remember it.
Yeah,
that's all I remember that one right now.
that's
But anyway,
definitely coming from a different place.
yeah, I was 15 years old looking at the world, and all right, here's a short one that I like. It's a happy one. It is,
No, we don't have to get happy. There's no requirements here.
yeah, we're just going with the flow. But here's a happy one. I remember this. It made me happy when I wrote it. It still makes me happy. I wish I was a bird with big white wings. Then I'd visit the clouds and see the heavenly thing. All day long I'd fly, and all day long I'd see the places I now dream of become reality.
That is gorgeous. I want to see that on the wall somewhere, on a mural. I want to see it in a children's book. When we first get exposed to poetry, it's a nice segue to what I wanted to share. I just wanted to share one poem I wrote this year. It's been many years of writing poetry, but it's again in the theme of being inspired by the abundance of nature and also tapping into the abundance within, the inner terrain that can sense and be sculpted by that outer reality. So I'll read it. It's not too long, and I'd love to hear what emanates for you from it. In spiral dance, they flutter into space. The chase is on. Two butterflies in grace. Cicadas hum and purify the air. Vibration medicine from lull to flare. The grass is wet and gentle on the feet. A tactile resonance, a steady beat. A fountain of aliveness, relational, reciprocal, while perched on gravity, still flying on elliptical, embodied knowing, breathing, sensing, a never-ending story of romancing with God, communed, eternal lovers, each one the universe discovers. Divine creation can't be spawned with wires and switches before dawn. No, life is not a simulation of data points and virtual extensions. We only need the morning song to know where humans thrive, belong.
Wow,
Written in March of this year.
beautiful. A lot of tactile, sensory, bringing in the grass and the toes and stuff. And then did you notice, you can see back on the video, that I shook my head no right before you said no, too.
You did. We
So,
will review that record. Yeah.
yeah, you're gonna do that. I know I did. You're like, da 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 da. And I shook my head and you're like, no, we don't.
So,
So,
you know me well. There are living contradictions within me. I work with contrast, and just like a flower pushing through the concrete to continue thriving, I feel that the outer pressures of life and some of the things I struggle with are really fertile soil for my poetry. So, when I'm referring to the tactile presence and oneness with all things, then I kind of went there without planning to the cold wires and the virtual reality and the very things that I feel are incoming and territorializing or colonizing human imagination. So I would love to use that as a segue to our discussion of the place of poetry in today's world, where I think sometimes process is compressed in favor of results, or this way of being is not really, we don't give ourselves permission or allocate space to this type of receptivity. What is the place of poetry in the contemporary context of everything that's happening vis-a-vis technology?
I think that poetry is a pathway to connecting with our own authentic being. And honest poetry, it has to come from individual presence and connection with being and with existence. It doesn't come from other people's thoughts. So I think that is the key. It is lived experience, and genuine poetry springs from individual reality and confronting that reality and then saying, this is what it is like to be me here in the world.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, like this poem is a record of my lived experience that was contained within 15 minutes of me sitting in the garden. And if I were to describe it in a matter of fact kind of way, I got up this morning and I made myself some tea and I went outside in the garden and I saw two butterflies that were spinning in a dance and I wrote a poem. It's a very different account of reality than this poem. I think there's preciousness in that. I think nothing can replace that, actually, or should.
You actually, you kept bringing to mind the poetry of Edna St. Vincent Millay is one of my favorite poets and an amazing individual, human being, and artist. And and she had a poem called Renaissance that was extremely famous and made a big impact in the world. And she wrote it. She's only, gosh, I don't remember if she was 19 or 23 or something, but she was very young when she wrote it, and people were shocked that she could write such a poem at such an age. But it reminded me of yours because in that poem she was very much talking about being present in the world of nature and in awe of all of this process of nature, creatively consuming itself and continuing. And so I would highly commend you to its consideration. check out Renaissance by Edna St. Vincent Millay. And also, there's a book called Savage Beauty about her, which I absolutely love. And I think you will also adore it. And anybody listening would be well advised to check out Edna St. Vincent Millay and that book, Savage Beauty. She had an amazing passion for life and a tremendous connection with that immediacy of presence in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Edna St. Vincent Millay is a fantastic example of what poetry is, and it's a nice it's a nice thing that your poem reminded me of her.
Yeah, we'll include those links in the description of the video for the listeners because this is happening within the umbrella of the Fully Human podcast, which I started. And my primary motivation is to add inspiration to daily living, to remind us of who we are, um, to help us unblock and tap into our own creativity. So, what would be a piece of advice to the non-poets of the world? And is there such a person in the world that we believe is a non-poet? Are we all inherently poetic beings? How do we tap into that nature?
Well, I think honestly that my particular acronym game and the way I present it is actually one simple, basic way. I think I can lead almost any group. I could take over any class anywhere in the world, more or less, and introduce them to my process and do an acronym game and come up with a lot of interesting insights and inspirations, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one answer. You know, there could be obviously hundreds or thousands of answers, but that's an immediate one for me from experience. I know, even with you, you
Yeah.
know, for example, uh, I've rarely found anybody who can do acronyms and not find something interesting going on. Although every once in a rare while, somebody will seem to be purposely almost incapable. But that's about 1 in 100 or so people who
Yeah.
seem to be so dedicated to not having any connection with their subconscious that they can manage to be nonsensical. But almost nobody can avoid their own subconscious subliminal sense revealing itself through the acronym.
Yeah, I prefer to write them down. I'm a very visual person. So as I write down the acronym, then one of the words becomes the inception of the next acronym and just becomes like a zigzaggy map. And I love that game too. And I've seen you play other games. I mean, come on, don't be humble. I've seen you literally invite people in a participatory way to call out a word, and then somehow all the words that they suggested will end up in your freestyling, which that I was always fascinated with, your ability to create rhyme and poetry in the moment and to include
Well,
everyone in the scenario of the poem.
so here we are,
Here
and
we are.
now we've not rehearsed this, so why don't you give me 3 words? We're gonna play a Harry Mack game.
Yeah, I'm gonna say flower pot, sky, roots, and stone.
Okay, that's how
I,
many words is that
I'm
now?
just looking out
Five
the
words?
window and I didn't even want to think or
Okay, here we go.
flower pot, roots,
I got
sky.
it.
Yeah, you got it. Okay.
No worries. Okay, now I'm gonna try to be hot. Flower pots in the sky, and I'm really not stopped. I'll come and tell you why, be revealed. This moment is free, can't be steal. I'm gonna peel banana, keep it real. Got these fruits, got these seeds. What you want, what we need. Gonna see all the hungry people come here to feed. Gonna hear what we need. Gonna see common love. David Knight, when it's down. Gonna look up above. It's all love. What you know, got this now. It's the flow from the top of the dome. In this rhyme game, I'm home.
Yeah. Oh, David. I couldn't learn that art. Like it's been 10 years and I can freestyle very slowly and gradually, almost like I'm speaking poetry, but at that pace and that level of like sharp presence, it's like being a magician.
It is. A magician and a musician are very similar.
Yeah. How does it feel like in your body when you're doing that? Obviously you're animated, but like how do all things land in the right place?
It's exciting. Fundamentally, it's like it's a physical. How do I explain that? My heart connects with the rhythm of what I feel, and my mind follows that rhythm. So I allow my mind to work with my organic nature, and I have a sense of non judgment and non resistance. So I've got, for example, here's a butterfly metamorphosis, coming getting high because there's more for us. Now watch it go up and disappear, because when poetry approaches close, there's no fear. Dry your tears and have a laugh, because this is not the last. We're moving to the future right now, escape the past. No cape, but I'm a hero. Multiply, you see, is high. Because I'm not a zero, infinite is how a sky. Yeah, something like that. So
I'm in
poetry is a form
awe.
of
I'm
love.
in awe of the living art of your poetry and freestyle. It is just something to behold and tune into and receive. I feel I feel electrified. I think the nature of improvisation is such that we're not mentally processing anything. We know something's being created in the moment, and the inner child is just so jolly with this process of witnessing someone create in the moment. It's like we're partaking in the creation. It's one thing when you write it and then you deliver it, right? But this is creation in the moment. It's infectious.
There's something special that happens for me too when I start to do that. And then if it's not always the same, sometimes I freestyle and it feels nice and it's fine. And then other times something else happens and it's more than that. And I feel a sparkling in my blood and I feel a crystallization of something beyond me. And then sense and metaphor and things will happen that I don't know and I didn't plan. And then and that's when it's the most wonderful for me is when I'm freestyling and then that happens and I see metaphors and connections emerge unexpectedly. And that is very exciting for me. When that happens, I feel, I guess it feels like giving birth. Like I know something new has come from me, something has been born in the moment, and that makes life feel worthwhile. And like I know I'm supposed to be here in the moment of being what I would say, a real poet, where I really feel that expression flowing through me. I know that's part of why I exist.
That's beautiful. It's purpose and it's also a path to divinity. I think that's something we haven't really touched upon because when you're becoming a channel for this art to come through without hindrance, you feel there's a greater force at play. And we all talk about that as artists, as the inspiration, and the muse. But it's yeah, it's something else, right? It's something else. And you and I talked about becoming a clear channel for that. I don't really mean it in the sense of channeling. It's become such a such a trendy word in the pseudo spiritual language today, but I mean it in the true sense of allowing creation to take place. um, and then we would read the poems later and not really recognize the authorship of the poem. It's like I wrote that, and then it communicates on a completely new level after months later or years later.
Yeah, for sure. That's happened to me. I hear things or read things sometimes that I wrote, and I'm like very amazed and touched by it. And that's an interesting feeling. It's because in a way it feels like it's not from me. And I had a funny thing happen many years ago. I was on a ski trip with a girlfriend at the time, and we were at her house up in the mountains, and she had some friends over. Uh, and somebody was like, "Oh, David, like, read some of your poetry." And so I recited that poem that I recited earlier, the "I Want to Build Something" poem. And one of the guys who was there, one of the skiers, like one of her skier friends, like, "Oh yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that somewhere before. Yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, no, you haven't heard it anywhere before." But it was funny that, and it was a strange, like, double-edged, like, on the one hand, I was kind of annoyed by this guy claiming that he'd heard it before somewhere, like kind of saying that I stolen it or something. So I was partly annoyed and then partly like flattered, like I was gonna, pretend that he's heard my poem or he thinks he knows it or something. And so that was pretty interesting and pretty cool. The
Yeah.
deeper side of that is that I guess when you tap into the collective unconscious on a certain level, then people will feel like it's something they already heard or they already know because it's so true.
Yeah. So true, so relatable. It speaks to their soul, right? Which almost makes me feel when the poem has a life of its own, So you write it, you feel that it's an interesting affair between you and God, or you're in nature, or you whatever, and whatever inspiration. But then the poem itself, it's like a spiritual being in its own way. And it communes with other people. It has a life of its own. And then when you read it, all of a sudden it impacts you in a new way. I find that fascinating and thinking about that. Yeah.
Very much, and also that songs are poems as well, is I think an important thing to mention, that music and poetry are close cousins, and and they overlap obviously in a lot of ways. So I think that I would almost call poetry a form of music. Maybe it is a form of music.
Mhm.
In any case, I see a close connection there. And my musical inspiration and my poetic inspiration come from a very similar aspect of my being. And so, just the way that poems have that power, there are songs as well that have such an impact on the world. And part of that impact has to do with their poetic insight and resonance.
Absolutely. And in your case, I have seen the novelty of this form when the two forms are converging for you, poetry and singing, and you would start freestyling, or what we would call in common language rapping, and then you would add this kind of sing rapping melody, to the experience, which is quite interesting. Or you would use the rap as a jump off point to get into a melodic, uh, some scales, and it's quite fascinating. So it's almost like, basically what I'm trying to say is that it's neither nor, but it's both. And I've heard you straddling those worlds in a very unique way. Are you still doing that? Would you like to give
Yes.
an example? Of what I'm talking about. So if you're
Okay.
freestyling, but you slowly morph it into a musical form.
All right, watch. This heart is beating, this meeting being recorded. Coming right now, cause you see the new orchid. We've been adult now, coming when we grow up. We wanna see to the meeting now. I've shown up. But now I'm singing when I'm bringing the light. I'm David Knight on the mic. I'm not feeling no fright. The meeting now be recorded. New water we'll see. I'm David Knight on the mic, breaking waves in the sea. Something.
That's right. That was the perfect example of what I was talking about. Wow. The musicality of speech is also something we rarely really take into account. We're singing while speaking, are we not?
Absolutely.
It's called dynamics, because I got into singing myself, and I realized, that everything that's within my range is in my speaking voice. When I express surprise and I go, "Oh my God," I'm in my head voice, or if I'm just deeper into ruminating over something, I'm reaching for some other frequencies right now. And it's a beautiful canvas to paint on, to think of ourselves as multidimensional artists.
As Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand reality, then think in terms of vibration. And the most essential, fundamental aspect of vibration that we experience is our heartbeat and our breath rhythm. And then from that comes speech. And the very intonation of these vocal permutations is, fundamental to how we exchange with each other. And so by connecting with this vibratory presence in a more deeply present way, we can therefore embody and reveal more completely what, in fact, we are in this world.
I think this is a beautiful place to pause the conversation for now. It could go on for hours, apparently, but this closure statement was really a gem. And I'd like to leave our viewers, potential listeners, with something like that to chew on, because there's so much richness in what you shared. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. And may we meet again and create together again. I said,
Absolutely. It's been a fantastic
thank you
conversation.
so much, David. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Lazarina. I
Have a
appreciate the
blessed,
invitation.
have a
What was
blessed
that?
day. Have a blessed day. Have a blessed day.
Thank you. Pura vida.
Okay. Pura vida.